Hello, this is Digits. I've been getting a lot of questions about how I play Shai in Capped Node Wars as someone who has played Shai since her release. This guide is going to be aimed at brand new Shai players who want to participate in Capped PvP, Node War, and Siege. I'll be making another video on Uncapped Shai in the future, but for now, this video will focus on the absolute sheer basics. And credit to my friend Slayantha for an old guide I learned from myself as a brand new Shai when I was a little bitty baby, and my friend James for the crystals, the setups, and yeah. What is your job as a Shai? The biggest mistake brand new Shai players make is thinking that they're damage class and they're going to be using their flooring to secure kills. But unfortunately, this will more often get you killed or put you like super out of position. Our job priority is actually very simple. We've got 4 things: buff, heal, debuff, and stay alive. If your buffs are available, you should probably be buffing. If your heals are available, you should probably be healing. If both are on cooldown, that's when you start looking for opportunities to debuff people. A Shai that keeps buffs and heals rolling is worth way more to a guild than a Shai that is chasing kills halfway across the battlefield. Shai gearing is funny because in a capped war, our only objective is to hit evasion, DR, and HP caps. Once those are filled out, the rest of what we run is almost entirely up to us. Purple accessories are pretty important because we are BSR batteries, and even having the cheapest of 1 crystal slotted in will increase our obtainable BSR by 10%. If you are like me and you absolutely hate grinding and your gear sucks, Prion accessories technically count as purple, and they will give you that crystal slot. It sounds crazy, but it works. Speaking of crystals, these are super flexible and can be moved around until you hit the HP cap or evasion cap or whatever else you need. These are the absolute sheer minimum crystals that I would recommend that work with this gear. Of course, these can be slotted around, and in some cases, once you hit the HP cap, or the evasion cap, or the DR cap, you can remove these and you can slot in something called a Kydex crystal. I know the Kydex will get you a lot of strange looks, but the reality is that we are not the ones doing damage and we are not killing people, and every tiny bit of HP recovery will help. Once you've gotten your attack and casting speed buffs, as well as hitting your caps, there's not much more we can do with our crystals for survivability, so it comes down to a 1% HP gain or a 0. It really isn't a lot, but in my experience, this has been a lot more useful than running an AP crystal. Of course, choice is yours. This is the sheer minimum that I would run for a T2 setup for Node War. These crystals, or these accessories, can be any kind of purple, at least 3 base Fallen Gods. You don't even have to run Dekia artifacts, you just need some base HP artifacts. You get your free shoes, and you must have a pen soul. If you don't have a Garmoth heart to put into it, then I highly recommend putting a Karanda heart. For your sovereign weapon, you're going to want to have at least these as your reforged stones. Of course, you can switch these around if you're reaching max HP, you can switch that for back attack, or you can switch all evasion for AP. But in my experience, for someone who is barely reaching caps, these are a good safe bet to you. A lot of players don't realize that Shai Buffs can only affect 10 people at a time, and they also have an entire 10-second long cooldown. These players don't need to be in your platoon, they just need to be considered an ally, such as a guild member, a merc, or an ally guild member. If someone is iframe spamming while you're buffing, they can actually dodge the buff entirely. So, if you are receiving buffs, please try to stay in forward guard or super armor rather than constantly iframing around. As a Shai, your goal is to maximize buff uptime. The more often your guild is buffed, the stronger your engages will be. The way you buff people is entirely up to you, but some people prefer to use certain songs last. And when I say last, this is because for the 10 seconds your Shai Buffs are on cooldown, that last song will continue to play, as you can see by these little weird water ripples. As a Shai, we have 4 main buffs. The yellow buff, which is called Shout to the Sky, gives a max HP buff of 1500 HP, while also restoring 500 HP and leaving a 10-second regen that restores 150 HP every 2 seconds. This restores a total of 750 HP over the course of 10 seconds. The pink buff, which is called Time to Shine, will recover an additional 4.5% to your Black Spirit Rage recovery. This is very useful when you're trying to feed Bomber, such as Zerkers and witches. The green buff is called Summer Rain, and it applies a CC resistance of 40% for 60 seconds. Finally, the blue buff is called Sun, Moon, Stars. It applies a speed buff of 10% for attacking and casting speed, as well as a 10% movement speed. In my personal opinion, this is the most important song to be playing uncapped or in capped fights. Also in uncapped, but that's another video. At the beginning of the war, I typically make sure that my pink buff is the last buff I use to make sure it applies to my entire ball. This way, everyone has a good amount of BSR going into a fight for Z buffs or bombs. Before a fight, I'll make my blue buff the last song. Before fights, I always make sure that the blue song is the last song that I use. This one. In between fights, and when we're recovering, I make sure that the yellow song is the last song that I use. This is very situational and highly dependent on how your own playstyle is, so just do what you feel is right. You'll figure one out. Although I personally wouldn't really call communication a skill, it is still very important for a Shai to know. If you quietly buff without telling anyone where you are, or that you're buffing, half of your guild won't be able to receive the buffs because they won't be able to find you, or know that you're buffing in the first place. The easiest way to fix this is with a yellow ping, aka the warning ping. First, ping in the location you intend to buff in, and then go stand on that ping. Wait a second or two, then use your buffs. This gives players time to react and move towards your position. Some Shai players also use giant chat macros with big arrows pointing in their location. For a very simple reason. Shais are tiny! Finding one inside a giant ball of players can be surprisingly difficult, especially if they have their nameplates on. The easier you are to find, the more effective your buffs are going to become. If there's one mechanic every Shai should know, it's quick buffing. This allows you to apply all 4 major buffs within just a few seconds. Start by entering the talent stance, either by animation cancelling Sun's Fury, which is my preferred way, or you could just use C. Then, you hold on F, and after the first pulse, quickly press D, A, and then S. D will apply the green buff, A will apply the red buff, and S applies the yellow buff. This will apply all 4 buffs in very rapid succession. The exact timing takes practice, and you will probably mess it up a few times. But once it becomes muscle memory, your buff up time improves dramatically. A lot of new Shai players will focus entirely on buffs, and forget they're also one of the strongest support healers in the game. Many of our heals are protected through super armor, and several are regenerations. Before an engage, I would use the Sharing is Caring bomb as well as a Cheer Up skill. Both of these are healing over time, either through a straight up regen or having a floating ball that follows them around and gives an AoE heal. Keep both of these skills on cooldown if you can, but remember that both of them are unprotected and can get you killed if you use them in combat. Get Well and Stick to Me are both AoE heals that are protected with super armor. If during combat you notice a CC friend, either of these are good to use as peel. The only skill I would be cautious of using is over here. In uncapped content it is very strong, but in capped content it will essentially make you a sitting duck. The evasion on it doesn't go over cap, and most of the people you'll be fighting are also well over the accuracy cap, so it will not affect them. Once your buffs and heals are handled, it's time to make the enemy feel bad. Your biggest debuff is called Misty Haze, which is an evasion and DR debuff. Unfortunately, in capped, this will probably not affect the enemy too much. They are most likely well over caps, so instead, I recommend you use Delusive Light instead. Delusive Light has a 30-second cooldown, which is only half of Misty Haze, but instead of just affecting AP and accuracy, it also affects crit rate and movement speed. It's one of your safest and most reliable tools during fights, considering it is also completely protected with super armor. Whenever enemy players are preparing to engage your guild, Delusive Light is usually a good answer before transitioning into bongos. You also have Sun's Fury for attack speed and movement speed reductions, but this tends to be much more situational. I personally only use Sun's Fury if I am already using Forest Echo, since it is a seamless and completely protected transition. Here you can watch an example of one of my very old gameplay videos. I'm very sorry about the quality, but as you saw, I did some buffing, and then I used a protected super armor movement to get to the ball, well, what was left of it. But when I realized they weren't there, I used my skateboard to quickly get out, while also being in a protected movement to get back to where my ball was regrouping. I used my heal, which was my regen, rebuffed the group with my yellow ping, before I noticed some people were getting attacked. This is when you use those heals that I told you early to peel for them before using your skateboard to continue moving with the ball for wherever Amiibo may go. Here, I'm doing another quick rebuff before the enemy engages on us, in which case I transition to Bongos, which is a giant AoE stun. Of course, it greatly depletes your stamina, so you can't do it forever. When there were less enemies around and I decided it was safe, I sped away and went back to the flag before I began to bongo underneath the barricades. I'm not really demonstrating this technique very well here, but as a min-height Shai, you can actually be directly underneath the barricades and use those bongos, and it will block a lot of the damage that is incoming onto you. If there are only 3 things you remember from this guide, just remember these. Keep your buffs on cooldown, communicate when you're buffing, and most importantly, stay alive. An alive Shai that is able to buff will be infinitely more useful than a dead one. Everything else, like advanced positioning, we're gonna win tactics, and using your 200% can come later. Make sure you master the fundamentals first. When you feel like you have a good grasp on those, you can come back and try and experiment more. But until then, just focus on maintaining the fundamentals.